In this video, we're going to have a look at loading your PDF plans, getting them scaled, and a couple of tips and tricks along the way. So I've headed to the Plans and Takeoffs tab, and I'm going to use this Import Some Plans button or the green plus button, both will do the same thing, to get the process started. When it pops up, you can drag plans into this box, which would be really good if you drag them from an email, for example. Typically what I do is just click in the middle, and that takes me back to my computer to go and find my plans. Now I downloaded them in the previous video, so that's where they're going to be, in my downloads folder. Quick note here, if you ever get into a situation where you have several files, totally fine to merge them all together and bring them in as one. And that would be really good if the architect, for example, sent you several files where each file represented one page. In this case, I'm just going to bring in one and go open. It will pop up asking about image quality, and the long and short of this is high quality will retain the color on plans. It will also make you or give you the ability to zoom further, so it's more detailed. On the other hand, it is a larger file, so it's slower to load and slower to work with. That said, as internet becomes better and better for many people, this is less of a concern, and generally you'll only notice it if you are, say, tethering from a phone or from a dongle, or you are on site on a mobile device. My rule of thumb here is if you don't feel you've got a huge set of plans or they're not colored, I generally don't bother with it, but it is very much personal preference. In this case, I'm going to use it just to show you what it will do. So we'll bring them in. The next thing we'll do once it's finished converting them, and if you do bring in, let's say 50 pages at high res, it can take a second. But the next thing we're going to do is the actual scaling step. Now we're doing the scaling basically to calibrate the plans so that later on when we're doing our takeoffs, Buildxact knows the size of everything. So we kind of go with the approach that we scale it up front and as a first step, so that we then don't have to really think about it much later on at all. Great, so when this one pops up, it's saying, hey, do you want to do that calibrating or scaling step right now? And very much personal preference on my side here, I say cancel, but I'll explain why I take this step. I typically find that for standard plans, you are going to have at least a couple of pages like this one where they're on their side, and you're going to want to rotate them using these buttons. I also find that standard plans will generally have at least a couple of pages that are just text, or they're pages that you're not going to do takeoffs from. Hence, being able to remove those pages is really handy. And lastly, I really like to name them using this, I'll just bring it up again, this blue edit pen. I really like naming them before I go ahead and scale them all. So put it another way, I kind of do my cleanup before I do my scaling. As far as the naming of the pages, you can name them whatever you like. The main benefit of this is that when you're flicking between pages later, you don't have to try and remember which page is which. You can write absolutely anything that you like on these. So even to the point where we sometimes get people write the scale on it, or write notes to themselves, or write things like not to scale. Yeah, it's all just helpful information for yourself. Beautiful. So once you have named them and done your cleanup, we then go to this orange scale button. And as we've probably talked about already, putting your mouse on any button will tell you what it does. But we go to this orange scale button and we go scale all plans. Now, the approach that I teach people to go with is that if you are going to scale each of the plans separately, so i.e. you're scaling this plan only and you do that for each and every page, it will take you quite a while. My approach is to scale all of them together, meaning that you pick a page and you say, this page is the same as all the rest, and it just scales them all to that scale. The only potential issue with that is that you might have like site plans that are a different size or sections that are a different size. So what we're going to do in this example is go with the scale all approach and then show you how to come back and fix those odd ones out, which is still going to be the quickest method. So I'm going to go scale all, and it will say, hey, great, pick which page you want to scale from. I'm going to use the floor plan. Generally speaking, floor plans are the ones you'll use because they have such good dimensions on them. And it's going to give you the steps up the top. Before we launch into that, a really quick intro just to driving this if you've not navigated the plans before. So I've got a wheel on my mouse, hence I'm using that to zoom in and out. You can adjust the speed of that zoom with this little dial down the bottom left, sorry. Personally, I just put mine on full speed. You can also zoom with this blue dot in the top left. As far as moving the pages, it's basically a click and a hold to drag the page around. If you're on a touchpad, you're just plonking your finger and dragging. And if you've used something like CAD before, often those kind of programs use the roller wheel in the middle to click and hold and move the plan. But for us, it's definitely the left hand button on your mouse. So now that I'm gone through that, following these steps up the top, step 1, draw a horizontal line on the plan below. Basically what that's trying to say is find the longest horizontal line you can, click on one end, go to the other end. You don't have to be able to see the whole line in one go. In fact, my preference is to do the exact opposite because I think it gives you a better shot at each end of the line. Click on each end, it'll change up the top to say how long is it, and you basically tell us what that line says. The reason that a longer line is better is really just that it's a super easy favor you can do for yourself, because let's say you did do your scaling off a 600mm line, you missed the end point by 20mm. Look, it's not a huge amount of a 600mm line, but it's even less of a 13,000, almost 14,000mm line. So the amount of problem that you're making for yourself is almost nothing for a line that's this massive. So like I said, really easy thing you can do, and it's a really simple favor you can do for yourself. If you did mess it up, you clicked on the wrong spot, you would go cancel and have another go, but I'm going to go next and follow the steps. So step 3, do a vertical line. Exactly the same principle, just for a vertical. Find the longest one you can. One end, other end, tell it how long it is, and finish. Now that will apply the scale to all of the pages, or 2 in my case. Like I touched on before, it's not unlikely for certain sets of plans that you will have varying scales. So an example might be that you've got 10 pages and 8 of them are 1 to 100, which for most people is the most common, and 2 of them are at 1 to 200. If that was the case, you would be finding the page, going rescale, and basically just scaling that separate page again on its own. Once you've gone through and done all of that, there is a really simple kind of check you can do just to make sure you are all good, because one bit of feedback we do get from time to time is people say, oh, I've done my scaling, but there's nothing that tells me I've done a good job or I've done it successfully. So a little tip here, and then we'll look at copying scale if you ever need to do that. Once you've done the scaling, you can absolutely do a takeoff here for the purpose of just testing it. Go test or check or whatever you like. It's just a mess around one to make sure that it all lines up well. And I can go test in linear meters. All this is doing is allowing me to now measure on the plans that I've scaled. The only point for doing this is you can go there to there, and it gives you confidence that the Buildxact measuring is accurate, and also that you've done it correctly. I do mine pretty quick and kind of slapdash, so I'm not too stressed that that's just a tiny bit off. But what I'm looking for here is if the Buildxact measure was like double or triple what this plan said, that's a really good indicator that I've messed up the scaling, or that this plan's to a different scale and I just didn't get around to coming back and fixing it. Long story short, it is way better to know this kind of stuff before you start doing all your takeoffs versus later. And again, it's just a really easy check you can do. So I'm going through all the different pages up in the top left, just carrying on, doing a couple tests. And once you're happy with it, so 2.4, yep, happy enough. Once I'm happy with it, I would go accept and save. I'm probably never going to use that takeoff for anything serious, but I'm just going to leave it there for to say, prove to myself that I've tested it. Lastly, on the scaling side of it, if you ever need to know this, you can copy and paste scale from page to page. The reason we bring this up is there are absolutely going to be some times where you bring in a page like this one and it doesn't have any horizontal measurements on it. It is perfectly fine if you're confident that it's the same scale as another one to go copy and paste from page to page. And really all that's saying is, hey, I know these two are the same. Grab it from one page, grab the scale from one page, put it onto the next one, and it will be all good from there. Beautiful. So final thing just to touch on, as you're doing your costings within the next tab that we'll be looking at, all of the takeoffs will start to line up here. So you can absolutely come back to this page at any point to see the takeoffs you've been doing. You can also use this cog to print or share specific takeoffs if you want. Printing the takeoffs and being able to email them to people as well is something we get asked about quite a bit, so it's well worth knowing that these are in here. Once you've done all this setup for your plans, the next step is moving on to costings. And that's a summary of how to get your plans in.